This film is the story of two artists, Frances Payne Adler, a poet, and KiraCorser, a photographer. Weaving their talents, they use words and images to speak on behalf of the poor and the increasing number of middle class who are becoming poor. And it's more than that. Weaving a Vision is a film about using art to alter society, art that can change our understanding of what it means to love our country. I would like to thank Bishop Leontine Kelly and Bruce Copeland for letting me interview them and for sharing their responses to the artists' work. Both are longtime social activists and models of transformational leadership. Bruce believes most of the injustices are created and perpetuated by institutions which can only be changed from within. In one case, he focused his work where he had the most influence, his own company. When he became president, his firm had no women or minorities in management positions. In 3 years, Bruce transformed that number into over 50%. Bishop Kelly is the first African-American woman to be appointed bishop in the United Methodist Church. She is a powerful voice, determined to wake up institutional religions to a deeper understanding of love thy neighbor. And she challenges us to ask ourselves just who our neighbor really is.
There are a whole group of people here in this country who would not know how to survive without a lot of material resources. But there are more and more people who have learned to survive with nothing. It should not be so, but it is so. And there are people from all walks of life. That's why the artwork and the poetry of Fran and Kira just moves me so deeply, because it captures that. When you hear the stories of the individuals who are street people, most of them are people who have made contributions sometime in their lives and been lost along the way. And there is no network to catch them. And I think that's what we're responsible for collectively, to build a human structural network to enable and empower and catch people.
What intrigues me is why you've chosen to do this, how you've focused on different problems. What is the motivation internally that is driving you to continually put these images in front of our faces?
Well, I guess the best way to tell it for myself is to go back to how we began. And that was in 1984, when there were those in Washington saying that there is no hunger in America. And here I was in San Diego, and it didn't feel real to me. It didn't match with my reality. And I remember that they had a presidential task force look into that. And the presidential task force determined that there is no documentable evidence of rampant hunger in this country. And I said to myself, what country are they living in? It's not the same one I'm living in. And I called Kira up and said, how would you like to document what we see? And she said, yeah, absolutely, let's do it. I took my pencil and paper, she took her camera, and we talked to them and interviewed them and photographed them. And that's how it began. And we had no idea what it was going to turn into. What was propelling me was I wanted to make real what was happening, my reality, Kira's reality, there in the frames.
This is one of the poems that
I'd like you to take a look at
Okay.
that Fran wrote, and
Would you like me to read
I'd
this?
like you to read it.
Okay. Called One Way. I've been speechless since morning. Scaffolding of language built up from childhood has fallen away. 1,400 people stand on the sidewalk for food on Easter Sunday. It is not that I cannot tell you what they said. It is not the woman who says, yes, I have a place to sleep, but only potatoes to feed my kids. It is not the man whose Social Security check hardly pays the rent who comes here to eat when he can. It is not the man with the extinguished eyes who wonders why, if unemployment is down, there are so many more like him on the street. It is not their words that have gnawed a hole in my vocabulary. It is a photograph in the morning paper of the Statue of Liberty. She is 100 years old and she is being repaired. Men and women on scaffolds work all day long to restore the words of poet Emma Lazarus. Each night they fade away again. Perhaps Emma would say it is because her words are less true lately. Perhaps she has seen these 1,400 Americans, tired, poor, huddled, yearning to breathe free. Wow. You know, some people have the ability to paint word pictures, so you can, you know, kind of immediately see what they're saying. And this one certainly does.
People tend to look away because you're afraid of the homeless. By Fran writing their stories through her poetry and me taking their photographs, we let people have the time to understand who and what was happening. One of the things that really excites us now is not just doing the art, because that is exciting, but building coalitions, getting nonprofits together, getting legislators together, and getting the art community together.
Know who the co-sponsors are of this event. The March of Dimes Birth Defects Foundation, Planned Parenthood affiliates in California, California Health Decisions.
Because then you have the emotional with the statistics, and the art, the way art works is works through the heart, so you have the heart and the mind all going, and maybe then you can find solutions.
What the photographs and the poetry tend to do is reach people in human ways, as Kira says, through the heart, and open them up to being receptive to the story, to being receptive to the issue. And it's at that point when they're open that the statistics and all the very important research that's being done can really be heard. For example, there's a wonderful story that we have from our first exhibition with Home Street Home. It was showing in the county building. And Senator Wadideta saw it there, and he had some legislation pending up in Sacramento in the Capitol building about the homeless. And he called us up and he said, you know, I have this legislation pending, but it's not getting enough attention. People are not stopping me in the hall and asking me about it. So what I'd like to do is bring it up there and hang it and see if it'll help. And what we did is we didn't hang it in the pretty rotunda downstairs in the main marble entryway. We hung it on the third floor in between the legislators' offices, you know, next to the dining room, next to the washroom, next to the elevators, so that when the legislators got off the elevators, there it was, the faces, the stories of people who were living on the street. It's as if Marilyn and Tom and Rhoda and Beverly were there in the Capitol building telling their stories in person, and they weren't threatening, you see. And in fact, he said that people started talking to him about it after that.
All I can do is start the process. It's like the artists. By itself, this isn't going to cause it to happen, probably. It's because there's an open legislator. There was somebody who had cried over something and then saw this and said, my God, we've got to do something. Here I am in the legislature. Here I am as a social worker, or here I am as a labor organizer. I can do something about the environment or about some of the injustices.
You talked about, before you began the exhibits, that you really had to overcome an inner sense of your own fear. What happened to your sense of power about yourself once you broke through that fear?
I think I had a strong sense even before the fear. I mean, even before we started talking to the homeless.
Can I tell you a story about that?
Yeah, go.
When we were first doing Home Street Home, we had this appointment with a judge that was concerned about all the homeless that were coming into his court. So we had this appointment in the morning at 9 o'clock in the morning at the courthouse. But we had been sitting in food lines before our jobs, and so we were dressed in jeans. Everybody else was in suits and dresses and, you know, dressed up to go to court. So we go to the courtroom and the door is locked. So Fran knocks on the window and the bailiff doesn't pay any attention to us. She knocks again and he turns around and looks at us and ignores us. And so then we were getting concerned, you know, so she knocked louder. I thought we were going to get thrown in jail, you know.
It's a great story because it shows so many things. It shows how a person is perceived by what they look like, not by who they are. And it also shows and taught us how privileged we are. That we assumed we should be heard because we felt empowered. And so here's these two privileged women who are outraged that they're not heard. When of course everybody is outraged by being not heard, but may not have enough empowerment to be able to recognize it and feel they have a right to it and express that outrage.
What happens if people aren't heard and they don't realize that they have a right to be heard? What happens?
Despair. Despair. One of the things that we did find is a lot of our expectations were turned upside down. I expected to find people who lived on the street outraged. I expected to find anger, and I didn't. Anger is power.
And she wrote a poem about it.
Where? This is not the Depression. People wait in line for food jammed into a walkway outside the church. A sign at the curb says, "Stop." Another says, "No left turn." A woman sits. On a ledge beneath the stained glass window, she takes up little space. Masking tape holds her jeans together. Hunger, she says, has made it difficult to talk. It has hit her in the stomach like a fist that shatters glass. It has cut the height of her glance, the boom of her voice. She is slowly being erased. The roll of her blanket, her small sack, a comb, hold her together. She even welcomes the lice. They make her scratch, remind her she is still here.
We did Struggle to be Born, which is about poor women that can't get prenatal care. Since we had some success with Home Street Home, going to Washington and to state capitals, then we thought, well, maybe we can help, you know.
Of that woman crying.
Oh, and the baby.
She was abruptly treated and passed off by the medical profession in a healthcare setting.
It's so, when she says the doctor touched my stomach, said everything was fine, but I knew something was wrong. I went home, called the clinic. Please, would you see me? My doctor isn't listening to my pain. The doctor's a good doctor. The nurse at the clinic told me, go back and see him. A week later, Rafaela was born. She was blue. Hypoxia, deficiency of oxygen, the doctor would write later in the chart. The doctor took her out, placed her on my stomach. I saw she was not moving. Asked what was wrong. He told me she needs oxygen, handed her to his assistant, left the room. I never saw him again. For 15 days, I watched the breathing machine push her chest up and down. I prayed and I prayed. She began to breathe on her own. The doctor says she has brain damage, but I know she's getting better. She knows me. She makes sounds. Sometimes I get angry. If he had just taken more time, watched for signals. He never weighed me, checked my blood, If he'd listened to that pain, maybe he could have done something, but he was rough, too much in a hurry. I remember after Rafaela was born, he didn't freeze me when he sewed me. It hurt more than the birth. I screamed, but he kept right on sewing as if I were a cow or a donkey. Powerful, powerful.
Kira and I saw in the newspaper many stories about women who were doing drugs and who were pregnant, and it troubled us very much. They focused on the baby story of how the babies were being damaged, and of course they were. What they didn't talk about was what was the mother's story. So we went to interview them as our way of having their stories heard. One of the startling facts that we found out was that many of the women were sexually or physically abused as children early in their life. We discovered Dr. Lenore Walker's work. She's from Denver, Colorado, the Institute of Domestic Violence there. And she actually corroborated our findings and said that 60 to 80% of women who do drugs while they're pregnant have been sexually or physically abused sometime in their lives. So it became an of course kind of thing. Yes, of course, this is happening. And they went on to abuse their children as they had been taught to do as children. But what it did is balance the story. Here's the baby stories. This is what's happening. But this is what's happening to the women, and we need to pay attention to that. And so the photographs circle in on that, and the poems do as well. This next poem, Tunnel Vision, is Tessa's story. She said to us, "People don't understand when I try to be honest and tell them, yeah, I was an abuser, but yet I was abused. They don't understand that." At what time in the tunnel did the gentle inhabitants of her body pack up and leave? At what time did her father's beer take the house
hostage? And she learned to live with too much sadness. He said I had to, and I better not tell. At what time did steel plank itself beneath her skin and ropes begin to bind her blood? What are these ropes, and how long the tunnel? At what time did steel plank itself beneath her skin and ropes begin to bind her blood?
This doctor I had interviewed showed me a photograph of a baby's brain scan that had 2 black holes on it. Sometimes when a woman uses cocaine, it can cause hemorrhaging, and that would cause those black holes in the baby's brain scan. So I felt very frustrated that I couldn't show some of the things that I was feeling in the exhibition, in my photographs. So I did this poem. It's called Black Hole. At night, a woman without eyes carries a bucket, sloshes water, washes a mother's wounds. She walks with me around white cocaine mountains, through puddles stained red with birth. I carry my camera, but I can't photograph the baby's scream. It rakes my nerves like fingernails. I can't shoot the smell of diarrhea, the baby's bottoms blistering as drugs leave their bodies. In a little girl's brain, a black hole sucks my heart. Still bothers me.
Good poem, Kira. Good poem.
We're working on a new exhibition called A Matriot Stream, Healthcare for All. We started this project because after I left PBS, after 10 years of working as staff photographer and having excellent benefits, I left to do my art full-time. And Fran and I had a grant to do When the Bough Breaks. And I tried to get health insurance on my own as a single artist. And I couldn't afford it and do my art full-time. And I'd wanted to do this for 17 years. So I said, what can happen in a year? And 6 months later, I got ovarian cancer. And in order to get Medi-Cal in California, you have to be destitute. And I became destitute very quickly, considering the medical bills that started piling up. And I had a social worker tell me, I'm sorry, you have to be terminal in order to get care. I had doctors say, I'm sorry, we don't take Medi-Cal. Or I'm sorry, you have to pay $175 per half hour up front. It took 6 months for Medi-Cal to come through. If I hadn't had friends help me, I'd be dead.
You talked about being ill and not being listened to, and losing your hair and not being listened to. For me, it was being brought up in an alcoholic family, and certainly that's informed the work.
How did that affect you, and how did you come out of that?
Well, there's no doubt that I lost voice, having my opinions negated as a child and having creativity not valued. Certainly, looking back, creativity was regarded as a character defect in my home. In a home struggling to deal with alcoholism, which none of us knew at the time, of course. I guess I can't really tell you step by step how I did it. I wrote a whole book about it, you know, and that book is called Raising the Tenth. Maybe I'll just read one poem that talks to that loss of voice and the retrieval. And another thing that I'd like to explain before I read the poem is that the process for me of retrieving language was my road to impairment. And the way I did it was to listen to my body. The language was so lost, I would be in a situation and I would begin to pay attention to how I felt, how my body was feeling. Because it was like my body knew something that my head didn't know, because my head was filled with everybody else's voices of what they wanted me to be. But my body remembered who I was as a small, wise child. And it was through the language of my body that I was able to recreate language. In other words, the poems are collections of moments that my body said, pay attention to. Why does that make me cry? Maybe because of the grief of the lost time. And I think that fuels the work so much when I see people and feel for people who are losing their lives to not being able to speak, to not being heard. And I connect to that. And I say, that's not acceptable, you know? Listen to their story. So here's my poem. It's called Mother Tongue, and I dedicate it to my daughter, Allison. Once at the beach, I stretched out on my back, hands pressed to my belly as water lapped my legs with shells and leaping fish. I felt you move inside me for the first time, your legs, your arms, braille stuttering across my palm. It seemed the hum of the ocean stopped, and I was slipping into another time, a time as a child when they called me, drew me to the dining room, to its circle of mirrors, one on each wall. I'd pull over a stool and climb up, see myself repeated infinitely. I'd touch the glass wherever it held my faces. That day at the ocean, my blood lit with you inside me. I could see in my infinite mirror. I'm a caravan of people traveling sand together. I'm the sweat of a stranger's child in fever, the sleepless eyes of a friend packing her son's bag for war, the ancient chant of a rabbi uncovering the mirrors of the dead. Allie, I've been a foreigner on this shore. I've lost my mother tongue. Yet sometimes it floats back briefly, not in words, but in moments like this, bodies within body, unslipping the knots of silence. I'll tell you a story, is that that relates to a Matriot's dream is that during the Persian Gulf War, when I was sitting at my desk and writing, and it came over the radio. I was listening to the radio at the time. I was working on some stuff at my desk, and it came over the radio that they'd invented a missile and named it a Patriot. And I said to myself, well, there's something wrong here, you know? If this is what a Patriot looks like, what does a Matriot look like? And it had never occurred to me before that that was a word that didn't sit right with me until they put a missile to it. And then it just opened wide out this whole new vision of what a Matriot looks like, and I invented a word. You know, they invented a missile, I invented a word, and actually wrote a definition. Matriot, noun, one who loves his or her country.
One who loves and protects the people of his or her country. And thirdly, one who perceives national defense as health, education, and shelter of all people in his or her country. We have so limited the definition of patriot to a military symbol, that to hear this, the freshness and the openness of this, it also speaks to me of the opportunity for women to do some very firm interpretation in all areas of life. You know.
Did you experience, or were you able to perceive a change in the people that you worked with?
Once you get beyond that fear that we talked about earlier, there's such a gratitude of being taken seriously and being listened to.
Like Gabe and Odette.
Oh, yeah.
They had 2 insurance policies, and neither one paid when his wife got cancer. I mean, he'd written hundreds of letters to legislators and felt like no one was listening to him. We spent the whole day talking to him.
We did, and I remember he said this may be the most important conversation we'll have, you know, in a long time.
I'd like both of you to address what you feel they give you.
Well, I think that what they give us is a collaboration of letting us into their hearts and their lives, and trust the images that I'm going to take will put them in a light that's compassionate.
For me, I don't know how to say this. It's like it breaks down walls between people, between myself and people I don't know, and creates a sense of community, almost a spirituality. Emily Dickinson talked about a seamless circle. I see dismissing people and leaving people out as a kind of violence of omission. And this works against that. It says no to it. And it creates this seamless circle, which to me, at some level, is very important spiritually.
I just see things weaving together, and that's there is a vision. It's Habakkuk, the prophet Habakkuk, the 8th century prophet, who wonders, you know, where God is in the midst of our lives in this kind of times when things seem to be, when, as he says, justice never goes forth. And the answer that comes to him is write the vision, and write it so clearly that even a running generation can't miss it. And that is to say that if we have a vision, then that vision is not merely for us, it's to be shared. And we share the vision with our life. The vision awaits its time. The end will not lie. But in the waiting moment, we write the vision of what the world could be, who we are, who we can become, we write the vision of our country as as matriots.